In the late 18th century, the region of southern Africa was a tapestry of independent chiefdoms, pastoral communities, and small polities, each locked in a delicate balance of power. The rolling hills of present-day KwaZulu-Natal were home to Nguni-speaking peoples, bound by kinship and clan loyalty, where leadership was rooted in chieftainship and consensus. Warfare existed, but it was often limited in scope. Skirmishes for cattle, disputes over grazing lands, or symbolic clashes meant to demonstrate bravery rather than annihilate opponents. This fragile order was about to be shattered. By the early 19th century, external pressures, population growth, competition for resources, and expanding trade networks were straining these societies. Meanwhile, European encroachment at the Cape was reshaping southern Africa's geopolitical landscape. Into this turbulent world stepped a man whose vision and ferocity would not only unite the Zulu people under one kingdom, but also unleash seismic changes across the subcontinent. Shaka Zulu, remembered to history as Shaka Zulu. Shaka's legacy is complex. He is hailed as a brilliant military innovator, a unifier who forged a mighty kingdom out of fragmented clans. At the same time, he is remembered as a ruthless leader whose campaigns of expansion left devastation in their wake. To understand Shaka, one must not only recount the dramatic events of his reign, but also place them within the larger dynamics of southern Africa and the global transformations of the early 19th century. Shaka Zulu was born around 1787, the son of Senzanga Kona Kajama, a minor Zulu chief, and Nandi, the daughter of Bebe, chief of the Langeni clan. His birth carried both prestige and scandal. Though his father was a descendant of the Zulu royal line, Senzanga Kona's union with Nandi was considered illegitimate under the customs of the time. As a result, Shaka entered the world under the shadow of rejection, marked as an outsider both within the Zulu chiefdom and the wider Nguni-speaking communities. The circumstances of his birth shaped his early years profoundly. According to oral tradition, he was mocked as an illegitimate child, often called Ishaka, a term referencing a parasitic beetle that clings to cattle. Whether this nickname was meant as ridicule or later reinterpreted as a prophetic symbol of strength, it foreshadowed his future reputation, one who clung to power relentlessly, transforming weakness into dominance. Shaka and his mother, Nandi, faced social stigma and mistreatment. They were eventually driven from Senzanga Kona's homestead and forced to live among the Langeni people. Even there, Shaka endured bullying, hunger, and hardship. Stories of his youth describe him as a tall, sharp-minded boy, quick to learn the arts of endurance and self-reliance. Nandi, fiercely protective and proud, instilled in him resilience, discipline, and the belief that he was destined for greatness despite his circumstances. His formative years in exile molded Shaka's character. He came to understand cruelty and rejection not as defeats but as lessons. Hunger toughened his body, insult sharpened his wit, and humiliation bred within him a resolve to one day command respect. Later chroniclers and oral historians often emphasized these early experiences as the crucible that forged his unbreakable will. By adolescence, Shaka was recruited into an ibuto, the regimental system used by Nguni chiefdoms to train young men in warfare and community duty. He joined the Mfecane chiefdom, ruled by Dingiswayo, a visionary leader who was already experimenting with reorganizing military practices. Dingiswayo became a crucial figure in Shaka's rise, not only as a commander who recognized his talents, but also as a mentor who offered him opportunities denied at home. Shaka excelled as a warrior. He was noted for his height, physical strength, and agility, but even more for his tactical mind and courage. Oral traditions recount how he could run vast distances barefoot without tiring, carry heavy loads with ease, and remain calm in the thick of battle. Unlike many young men who treated warfare as ritualized skirmishing, Shaka approached it with deadly seriousness. For him, combat was not just about honor. It was about survival, victory, and reshaping power. It is impossible to separate Shaka's early trauma from the man he became. His rejection by his father and mockery by peers instilled in him both deep insecurity and unyielding ambition. The shame of illegitimacy transformed into a lifelong drive to prove himself. His relationship with his mother, Nandi, became central. She was not only his defender, but also his anchor, and later, when she died, her absence would unhinge him. Historians often debate how much of Shaka's later ruthlessness can be traced back to these years. Was he hardened by necessity, simply a product of violent times? Or did the scars of humiliation breed within him a mercilessness that exceeded his contemporaries? Whatever the answer, his youth carved in him a singular determination: to rise above dishonor, to unite his people, and to forge a power that none could ignore. Shaka's true rise began under Dingiswayo, the chief of the Mfecane Confederation. Dingiswayo was unlike many of the traditional chiefs of the time. Instead of clinging to older customs of limited raiding and small-scale conflicts, he envisioned consolidating smaller clans into larger political and military units. He was a reformer, and his leadership created fertile ground for ambitious warriors like Shaka. Shaka quickly distinguished himself among Dingiswayo's ranks. He earned a reputation for discipline, loyalty, and above all, an unmatched ferocity in combat. His skill in battle and his ability to organize warriors impressed not only his peers but also Dingiswayo himself, who recognized the young man's potential. In Dingiswayo's army, Shaka began experimenting with tactics and strategies that departed from the norm, planting the seeds of what would later become revolutionary. During this period, traditional warfare among the Nguni was largely ritualistic. Battles were often more about posturing than annihilation. Warriors used long throwing spears, assegai, and carried large, lightweight cowhide shields. Engagements typically involved hurling spears from a distance, taunting, and brief clashes before retreating. Casualties were relatively light, and disputes ended with modest spoils such as cattle. Shaka found this approach ineffective. He began experimenting with the iklwa, a short stabbing spear with a broad blade, designed for close combat rather than throwing. Unlike the traditional assegai, the iklwa forced warriors into brutal hand-to-hand fighting. To complement this, Shaka insisted on stronger, heavier shields that could withstand blows and provide offensive opportunities. He also emphasized endurance, drilling men in long marches to accustom them to fighting while exhausted. Though still a subordinate under Dingiswayo, Shaka's ideas attracted attention. His units became known for their efficiency, aggression, and unity, foreshadowing the legendary regiments he would later command. Meanwhile, in the Zulu clan, the small and relatively minor chieftaincy ruled by Shaka's father Senzanga Kona, politics were shifting. When Senzanga Kona died around 1816, his legitimate heir, Sigujana, assumed leadership. But Shaka, emboldened by his successes with the Mfecane, had ambitions far greater than merely serving under Dingiswayo. Backed by Dingiswayo's support and his growing reputation as a formidable warrior, Shaka challenged Sigujana for leadership of the Zulu. Sigujana's reign was short-lived. Accounts vary. Some suggest he was assassinated outright, others that he was overthrown in a coup led by Shaka with Mfecane assistance. Regardless, by 1816, Shaka assumed the chieftainship of the Zulu clan, elevating himself from the disgraced son of exile to the leader of a people. Once in control, Shaka moved swiftly to consolidate his authority. He reorganized the Zulu military along the lines he had envisioned, creating age-based regiments, amabuto, that trained year-round and lived together in barracks. This system, already in embryonic form under Dingiswayo, was perfected by Shaka into a national institution. Young men were recruited into regiments, drilled relentlessly, and taught absolute loyalty to their leader. He also began absorbing smaller clans into his growing domain, sometimes through diplomacy, more often through force. Cattle, the primary symbol of wealth and power, was seized from defeated enemies and redistributed among his loyal warriors, cementing their dependence on him. By fusing military might with political authority, Shaka transformed the once obscure Zulu chiefdom into a rising regional power. Shaka remained formally subordinate to Dingiswayo, but his influence grew so quickly that he soon rivaled his mentor in power. Dingiswayo, however, continued to support him, perhaps envisioning Shaka as a key lieutenant in the expansion of the Mfecane Confederation. But fate intervened. Around 1817, Dingiswayo was captured and killed by Zwaide, chief of the Ndwandwe, another rising power in the region. The death of Dingiswayo left a massive vacuum. For Shaka, it was both a crisis and an opportunity. With his patron gone, he faced immense pressure from the Ndwandwe, but he also inherited a large portion of the Mthethwa's allegiance. His military genius and charisma now had the stage they required. Shaka was poised to take the fractured remnants of the Mthethwa Confederation and weld them into a new kingdom, the Zulu nation. When Shaka assumed leadership of the Zulu in 1816, he inherited a small, relatively weak chiefdom, surrounded by rivals far larger and more powerful. What set him apart was not merely ambition, but his radical reimagining of warfare. In an era when many Nguni conflicts were ritualized, Shaka redefined battle into an instrument of total conquest. His changes in weapons, training, tactics, and organization made the Zulu army a force feared across southern Africa. At the center of Shaka's military reforms was the iklwa, his redesigned short-stabbing spear. Unlike the traditional assegai, a long lightweight spear meant for throwing, the iklwa had a shorter shaft and a broad, heavy blade designed for thrusting at close quarters. Its name came from the sound it was said to make when pulled from a victim's body. This new weapon forced warriors into intimate, deadly combat. Battles ceased to be long-distance exchanges of spears. They became close-range clashes of discipline, strength, and ferocity. The iklwa demanded courage, but it also gave the Zulu a decisive edge. Warriors armed with it could overwhelm opponents who were still throwing spears from afar. To complement the iklwa, Shaka strengthened the traditional Zulu shield, isilangu. Larger, heavier, and made of tough oxhide, it was not just a defensive tool, but also an offensive weapon. Shaka trained his warriors to use the shield aggressively, hooking an enemy's shield aside to expose him, then driving the iklwa into his unprotected body. This combination of shield and stabbing spear turned every Zulu warrior into both defender and attacker. Discipline and cohesion magnified their power. A Zulu regiment could push forward as a living wall, shield to shield, cutting down opponents in relentless waves. Shaka also introduced new battlefield formations, most famously the bull horns, Izimpondo Zankumo strategy. This tactic divided his army into three components: the chest, isifuba, the central main force which engaged the enemy head-on, the horns, Izimpondo, two flanking forces that swept around to encircle the enemy from both sides, the loins, Umkosi Wesilisa, a reserve force held back until the enemy was trapped, then unleashed to finish the battle. This maneuver was devastating. Enemies accustomed to ritual combat found themselves encircled, cut off, and annihilated. It represented not just superior tactics, but also Shaka's genius for combining discipline with innovation. Shaka's warriors were not casual fighters. They were professionals. He imposed grueling training regimens. Warriors marched 50 miles in a day, barefoot, to harden their feet. They were forbidden to wear sandals, believing that toughened soles improve speed and endurance. Warriors carried their weapons at all times, even while resting, ensuring constant readiness. Failure or cowardice was met with severe punishment, sometimes death. But success brought honor, cattle, and wives. The regiment, Ibuto, became not just a fighting unit, but a community, instilling loyalty, brotherhood, and a sense of destiny. Shaka expanded the age grade system into a national institution. Young men were conscripted into Amabuto, where they lived together in military barracks, Amakanda, trained year-round, and awaited the king's orders. Only after distinguished service could warriors marry and establish households. Marriage itself became a reward for military achievement. Through this system, Shaka tied the life cycle of his people to the state's military needs. Every young man became a soldier. Every family was invested in the success of the Zulu army. Warfare ceased to be seasonal raiding. It became the lifeblood of the kingdom. Shaka understood that victory was not only physical, but also psychological. His army cultivated an aura of terror. Battles often ended with the complete destruction of enemy forces, sending survivors fleeing in panic. The sheer brutality of Zulu assaults spread fear across the region, leading many smaller chiefdoms to submit without resistance. Ceremonial displays reinforced this reputation. Warriors performed fearsome dances, chanted war songs, and demonstrated absolute obedience to Shaka. His very presence inspired both awe and dread. further magnifying the psychological impact of the Zulu war machine. By 1817-1818, Shaka's reforms were tested against the powerful Ndwandwe, led by Zwide. These early clashes proved the effectiveness of his methods. Although initially pressured, the Zulu regiments under Shaka fought with discipline and ferocity, holding their ground and striking fear into larger, less organized forces. It was in these battles that the bullhorns formation proved its worth, allowing smaller Zulu forces to encircle and annihilate their enemies. Victories against the Ndwandwe established Shaka's reputation and secured the Zulu's survival during their precarious early years. When Shaka seized power in 1816, the Zulu numbered only a few thousand people, dwarfed by neighboring chiefdoms like the Ndwandwe and Mfecane. Within a decade, he had forged them into the nucleus of a kingdom that stretched across much of modern KwaZulu-Natal. This transformation was not merely the result of his military genius, but also of his political skill, his ability to inspire loyalty, and his ruthless suppression of opposition. The Ndwandwe under Zwide posed Shaka's greatest early challenge. After Dingiswayo's death at their hands, the Ndwandwe became the preeminent power in the region, threatening to crush the rising Zulu. From 1818 to 1819, a series of wars between Shaka and Zwide determined the fate of the entire region. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Coakley Hill, 1818. Vastly outnumbered, Shaka positioned his regiments on a hilltop, using the terrain to neutralize Ndwandwe numbers. He feigned weakness, luring enemy forces into repeated assaults while conserving his own. When the Ndwandwe grew exhausted, Shaka unleashed his reserves, encircling and routing them. It was a stunning victory that showcased both his tactical brilliance and the effectiveness of his bullhorns formation. The final blow came at the Battle of Mulatu's River, 1819, where Shaka's forces again crushed Zwide's army, scattering the Ndwandwe into permanent decline. Many survivors fled north, spreading chaos throughout southern Africa, a chain reaction known as the Mfecane or Mfecane. This victory cemented Shaka's dominance in the region. Following the defeat of the Ndwandwe, Shaka turned to consolidating his power by absorbing neighboring chiefdoms. Some joined willingly, recognizing the futility of resistance. Others were subdued by force. Defeated chiefs were often killed, while survivors were integrated into Zulu regiments. This policy created both unity and fear. Once a clan was incorporated, it ceased to exist as an independent entity, its identity subsumed under the Zulu nation. The rewards of loyalty were significant. Cattle seized in conquest were redistributed, strengthening warriors' dependence on Shaka. By rewarding bravery with wealth and wives, Shaka tied the fortunes of his people directly to his military campaigns. Every conquest became both a test of loyalty and a path to prosperity. As his kingdom expanded, Shaka built new royal military settlements, Amakanda, that served as barracks, administrative centers, and symbols of power. The most famous was Bulawayo, his great capital, where thousands of warriors resided and where the king presided over councils, ceremonies, and military reviews. These settlements enforced centralization. Warriors were separated from their home villages, reducing local loyalties and binding them directly to Shaka. This system created a national identity that transcended clan divisions. For the first time, the Zulu were more than a chiefdom, they were a kingdom. Shaka did not rely solely on war. He used diplomacy to secure alliances when beneficial, especially with smaller clans who could serve as buffers against powerful enemies. His charisma and reputation often persuaded chiefs to submit peacefully. In some cases, marriages were arranged to bind allies, though Shaka himself never married, preferring to maintain control over succession by avoiding rivals within his own household. Nevertheless, diplomacy was always backed by the threat of force. Few chiefs doubted that defiance would bring swift and total destruction. By the early 1820s, the Zulu kingdom's influence extended far beyond its original boundaries. Shaka's armies launched raids into neighboring regions, spreading terror and displacing countless communities. Some fled north into present-day Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, while others migrated west into the interior. These movements reshaped the demographic and political map of southern Africa. In this way, Shaka was not only a king but also the catalyst of widespread upheaval. His conquests set in motion migrations that created new polities such as the Gaza state in Mozambique and the Ndebele kingdom under Mzilikazi. The ripple effects of his expansion reached thousands of miles from Zululand. Within his realm, Shaka became the embodiment of unity and authority. He demanded absolute obedience and maintained a reputation for harsh discipline. Stories of his ruthlessness spread widely. Entire villages destroyed for disobedience, warriors executed for hesitation in battle, and rival chiefs crushed without mercy. Whether exaggerated or not, these accounts reinforced his power, making resistance unthinkable for many. At the same time, he inspired deep loyalty among his warriors. To serve under Shaka was both an honor and a path to advancement. His genius lay in combining fear and reward, cruelty and charisma, to bind his followers into a single, formidable nation. Shaka's most profound impact was not just on the battlefield but on everyday Zulu life. Under his rule, the kingdom became a militarized society, where nearly every institution revolved around sustaining the army. Men were organized into regiments, amabuto, housed in military settlements, amakanda, and drilled constantly. Service in these regiments was not temporary, but lasted until warriors had earned the right to marry, usually after years of distinguished duty. This system ensured that the most vigorous years of a man's life were devoted to the state. By controlling when his warriors could marry, Shaka also controlled population growth, delaying family life in order to concentrate resources and loyalty on the military. Women too were integrated into this system, though differently. While they did not fight in Shaka's armies, they played essential roles in maintaining military settlements, producing food, crafting clothing, brewing beer, and sustaining the warriors' daily needs. Shaka also organized young women into age-grade groups, paralleling the male regiments. Marriage became a political tool. Warriors were often forbidden from marrying until they had achieved significant victories. When marriage was finally permitted, Shaka himself allocated wives, often as rewards for loyalty or bravery. This practice bound warriors to him personally, as their ability to start families depended on his approval. Shaka enforced strict discipline, both within the army and across society. Justice was swift and often brutal. Theft, cowardice, or insubordination could result in execution. Entire families could be punished for the disloyalty of a single member. Oral traditions tell of Shaka ordering executions for minor infractions, though historians debate how much of this reflects historical reality versus the fear he inspired. Yet Shaka's harshness also maintained order in a society undergoing rapid transformation. His authority was absolute. No council of elders or hereditary chiefs could challenge his decrees. He centralized power in his own hands, stripping away traditional checks and balances. The Zulu economy under Shaka rested on two pillars: cattle and agriculture. Cattle were the ultimate measure of wealth, serving as currency, food supply, and the basis of marriage dowries, lobola. Shaka seized cattle from conquered clans and redistributed them to reward loyal warriors, creating a system in which wealth flowed downward from the king. Agriculture, primarily the cultivation of sorghum and maize, provided the staple diet. Women worked the fields, while men guarded herds or fought in campaigns. Military settlements were strategically placed near fertile lands to ensure a steady food supply for the regiments. By controlling cattle distribution and access to land, Shaka ensured that economic survival depended on allegiance to him. Zulu religious life revolved around ancestor worship and the belief in spiritual forces that influenced daily events. Shaka used these traditions to reinforce his rule. He positioned himself as divinely favored, often consulting diviners, izanusi, before campaigns and attributing victories to ancestral blessing. Ceremonies such as the First Fruits Festival, Umkosi Wokweshwama, became occasions for reinforcing loyalty. During these rituals, Shaka presided as both king and spiritual guardian of his people, binding military authority to sacred legitimacy. Life under Shaka was marked by a delicate balance between devotion and terror. Oral traditions recall instances of extreme cruelty, executions of entire villages for disobedience, or warriors put to death for failing to show sufficient zeal in battle. At the same time, warriors sang songs in his praise, and many remained fiercely loyal even after his death. This paradox is key to understanding Shaka's legacy. He inspired fear, but he also cultivated pride in being Zulu. His kingdom was not only a political entity, but also a cultural identity, forged through shared struggle, discipline, and loyalty to the king. Perhaps Shaka's most enduring achievement was transforming the Zulu from a minor clan into a cohesive nation. Before him, the Zulu were one of many small Nguni-speaking chiefdoms. Under his reign, they became the Zulu Kingdom, united, militarized, and feared across southern Africa. This transformation went beyond warfare. Through his control of marriage, cattle, rituals, and daily life, Shaka reshaped the very fabric of society. The Zulu identity became synonymous with strength, discipline, and unity, outlasting even his reign. The word Mfecane in Zulu means the crushing or the scattering, while Mfecane in Sotho translates as the forced migration. Both describe a period, roughly from the 1810s to the 1830s, when massive upheavals swept across southern Africa. Villages were destroyed, populations displaced, and new states formed in the chaos. While the causes were multiple, population pressures, drought, European trade disruptions, Shaka's wars and Zulu expansion acted as a catalyst that amplified these pressures into a storm of violence and migration. After the Zulus' victory over the Ndwandwe in 1819, tens of thousands of defeated warriors and refugees streamed into new territories, either fleeing destruction or seeking to carve out new domains. Shaka's military revolution had raised the stakes of war. Once ritualized conflicts became wars of extermination. Those unwilling to join the Zulu were scattered across the subcontinent. Thus, the Mfecane was not merely the expansion of the Zulu kingdom itself, but the domino effect triggered by Shaka's campaigns. Like ripples from a stone thrown into a pond, waves of violence, displacement, and migration spread far beyond Zululand. The upheavals led to the birth of new states across southern Africa. Among the most significant were the Ndebele Kingdom under Mzilikazi, a former Zulu general who broke away from Shaka around the mid-1820s. Leading his followers northward, he carved out a new kingdom in what is today Zimbabwe. The Gaza state in modern Mozambique, founded by Soshangane, another refugee leader from Ndwandwe Zulu conflicts. The Swazi Kingdom, consolidated under Sobhuza I, partly in response to pressures created by Zulu expansion. The Sotho Kingdom, forged by Mosho Shumanman in the mountain strongholds of modern Lesotho, where he provided refuge to displaced peoples and established a new political order. These states were shaped in part by Shaka's military innovations, as they adopted similar regimental systems and tactics. The Mfecane scattered populations across thousands of miles. Some communities were wiped out entirely, others merged into new polities, and still others fled into previously uninhabited regions. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of people were displaced during this period. Crops were abandoned, cattle herds scattered, and famine often followed in the wake of armies. Oral traditions describe entire valleys emptied of their people, while archaeological evidence points to sudden shifts in settlement patterns across southern Africa. The Mfecane has long been the subject of debate. Some historians portray Shaka as the prime instigator, whose ruthless conquests sparked the chaos. Others argue that European colonial expansion, particularly the demand for slaves and ivory at Delagoa Bay, Mozambique, and the Cape, played an equally significant role in destabilizing the region. What is clear is that Shaka's militarization of the Zulu set a new precedent for warfare. His victories magnified existing tensions, and his dominance sent shockwaves that others exploited or resisted, leading to a cascade of conflict. The Mfecane reshaped the entire political map of southern Africa. It destroyed old chiefdoms, but also created new, more centralized states. It demonstrated the power of Shaka's model, which was imitated by leaders far beyond Zululand. Yet it also left scars, mass displacement, trauma, and narratives of destruction that endure in oral histories. For the Zulu themselves, the Mfecane was both a story of triumph and a source of enduring controversy. Shaka's empire rose on the ashes of countless others, and the memory of his expansion remains contested, seen by some as nation-building, by others as devastation. When Shaka rose to power in the 1810s, European colonial expansion was reshaping southern Africa. The British had seized the Cape Colony from the Dutch in 1806, and Boer, Dutch settler communities, were beginning to expand eastward into the interior. Meanwhile, Portuguese traders were active along the Mozambican coast, and British and American ships were making contact with the Southeast African coastline. Shaka's Zulu kingdom, situated inland from the coast of modern KwaZulu-Natal, was not isolated from these movements. By the early 1820s, European hunters, traders, and adventurers began reaching Zululand, drawn by ivory, hides, and the promise of alliances with powerful African rulers. One of the earliest recorded European visitors to Shaka's court was Henry Francis Finn, a British adventurer and trader who arrived in the early 1820s. Finn and other traders, such as Nathaniel Isaacs, established relationships with Shaka, offering firearms, beads, and cloth in exchange for ivory and cattle. These men recorded vivid accounts of Shaka's personality and court, portraying him as both a charismatic leader and a fearsome despot. Though their writings remain colored by exaggeration and self-interest, they provide some of the most detailed contemporary descriptions of Shaka. Shaka treated these European visitors with a mixture of openness and caution. He welcomed them as potential allies and sources of valuable goods, but remained suspicious of their motives. He was fascinated by firearms, but recognized their limitations. Muskets of the time were slow to reload, unreliable in rain, and less effective than the disciplined Zulu regiments in close combat. Thus, while he acquired guns, he did not restructure his army around them. Diplomatically, Shaka sought to use Europeans to bolster his prestige. Hosting white visitors at his court projected his influence to both his own people and neighboring chiefdoms. Yet he was careful not to allow outsiders to undermine his authority. Traders could come and go, but they remained subject to his rules. By the mid-1820s, European traders were establishing a more permanent presence at Port Natal, modern Durban. Shaka permitted this settlement, seeing it as advantageous for trade, but he maintained strict control. He demanded tribute from the settlers, treated them as his clients, and expected them to provide him with supplies and services. Finn, for example, claimed to have acted as Shaka's doctor, tending to his wounds after an assassination attempt in 1824. Whether or not this story is embellished, it illustrates the delicate balance of their relationship. Shaka used European skills and goods, while the settlers relied on his protection and permission to remain. The British colonial authorities at the Cape were aware of Shaka but maintained only limited direct contact. Some officials viewed him with admiration as a powerful ruler who maintained order in his domain. Others regarded him with suspicion as a potential threat. In practice, the British presence remained distant, as they were more focused on consolidating the Cape and managing conflicts with the Xhosa to the south. Nevertheless, Shaka's reputation spread. Reports of his conquests and the upheavals of the Mfecane reached Europe, where he was often portrayed in sensationalist terms as a Black Napoleon, both admired for his genius and feared for his ruthlessness. Through contact with Europeans, Shaka gained access to goods that enhanced his kingdom's prestige: cloth, beads, iron tools, and occasionally firearms. However, he remained pragmatic. Firearms were not mass-produced in Zululand, and he did not allow them to undermine the Zulu reliance on discipline, mobility, and the iklwa spear. What Shaka truly valued was control of trade routes. By dominating the interior, he positioned the Zulu as essential intermediaries between the coast and inland communities. Europeans at Port Natal could only trade with the hinterland through Shaka's permission, further consolidating his power. Unlike later Zulu kings, Shaka did not face direct European invasion during his lifetime. His encounters were primarily with small groups of traders and adventurers whom he skillfully manipulated to serve his purposes. In this sense, Shaka remained firmly in control. Yet these first contacts planted seeds. The European presence at Port Natal would eventually grow, and the balance of power between African kingdoms and colonial empires would shift dramatically in the decades after his death. Shaka himself, however, never became a client of European powers. To the end, he remained master of his domain, wary of outsiders, but willing to exploit their presence. The most devastating blow to Shaka's personal life came in 1827, when his mother Nandi, the woman who had fiercely protected and encouraged him since childhood, died. Shaka's bond with her had been unusually close, not only as a son, but also as a man whose early hardships were shared with her. Her death shattered him emotionally and unleashed a wave of extreme behavior that destabilized his kingdom. In his grief, Shaka ordered an extraordinary and brutal period of mourning. Oral traditions record that no crops were to be planted during the season following her death. Women who became pregnant during this period were executed along with their husbands, as Shaka declared that no new life should enter the world while Nandi was gone. Thousands of subjects were reportedly killed for failing to display sufficient grief. Though these accounts may have been exaggerated by later storytellers, they reflect the atmosphere of fear and instability that marked his final years. Even before Nandi's death, Shaka's rule was increasingly marked by suspicion and paranoia. As his power grew, so did the number of potential rivals, both within his court and among subject peoples. He became increasingly ruthless toward perceived enemies, ordering executions at the slightest sign of disloyalty. Former allies, including close generals and relatives, began to fear for their lives. Shaka's refusal to marry or produce a clear heir further unsettled the kingdom. Without a successor, the question of who would inherit the throne became a source of tension. His insistence on total loyalty, combined with unpredictable acts of cruelty, alienated many who had once supported him. Among those closest to Shaka were his half-brothers Dingane and Mlangana, both of whom harbored ambitions of their own. At first, they served him loyally, but as his erratic behavior deepened, they began conspiring against him. Shaka's senior commander, Mbofa, also joined their plot. Frustrated by the king's increasingly tyrannical rule, whispers of dissent spread through the regiments and among chiefs who had grown weary of Shaka's endless wars and harsh discipline. Many feared that his grief-driven decrees would plunge the kingdom into famine and ruin. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded Shaka began to crack. On 24 September 1828, the conspirators struck. While Shaka was resting at his royal kraal near Kwadukuza, Dingaan, Mlangana, and Mbofa entered his hut under the pretense of visiting him. Armed with spears, they attacked suddenly. Shaka, taken by surprise, was stabbed repeatedly. According to tradition, his last words included a chilling warning. "Are you stabbing me, brothers? You think you will rule the nation, but you are driving it to destruction. The white men are coming." Whether these exact words were spoken or later attributed to him, they have echoed through history as a prophetic recognition of the colonial challenges that would soon engulf the Zulu kingdom. Shaka's body was hastily buried in an unmarked grave, its exact location still unknown today. His assassins quickly moved to consolidate power, with Dingaan emerging as the new Zulu king. The murder of Shaka ended one of the most extraordinary reigns in African history. Dingaan, now ruler, attempted to stabilize the kingdom by reversing some of Shaka's harsher policies. He allowed warriors to marry more freely and reduced the extreme demands of military service. While this earned him some popular support, he lacked Shaka's military genius and charisma, and the kingdom soon faced new challenges, both from within and from the encroaching Europeans. Shaka's death also symbolized the fragility of autocratic power. Despite his dominance, the betrayal of a few close relatives was enough to bring him down, yet the kingdom he built did not collapse with him. His institutions, the regiments, the centralized authority, the culture of unity, endured, shaping the Zulu state for decades to come. Shaka's most enduring achievement was the transformation of the Zulu from a small, obscure clan into one of the most powerful kingdoms in southern Africa. In just over a decade of rule, he centralized authority, created a permanent military system, and forged a national identity that transcended clan loyalties. What had once been a minor chieftainship became a Zulu nation, capable of commanding respect from both African neighbors and European settlers. This legacy outlived Shaka himself. The institutions he established, the Amabutho regiments, the centralized system of command and the cultural identity of being Zulu, endured through successive rulers, including Dingaan, Mpande, and Ketshwayo, who would later face the British during the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. Historians often compare Shaka to figures like Alexander the Great or Napoleon Bonaparte for his military genius. His introduction of the iklwa stabbing spear, the aggressive use of heavy shields, and the bullhorns formation revolutionized warfare in southern Africa. These innovations spread beyond the Zulu kingdom, as neighboring states, both friend and foe, adopted similar tactics. Even European observers, accustomed to dismissing African warfare as primitive, recognized Shaka's brilliance. Accounts by traders and adventurers frequently described him as a natural strategist whose methods could rival those of European generals. Yet Shaka's legacy is also marked by destruction. His conquests and the chain reaction they triggered contributed to the Mfecane, decades of upheaval that displaced hundreds of thousands of people across southern Africa. For some, Shaka is remembered as a unifier, for others as the architect of devastation. The truth is complex. Shaka did not act in isolation. Climate pressures, European trade, and existing rivalries all contributed to the chaos. But his methods of total war and forced absorption magnified the scale of upheaval, ensuring his name would be forever linked with the Mfecane. Because Shaka's life overlapped with the arrival of European traders at Port Natal, his reputation quickly spread beyond Africa. Early chroniclers like Nathaniel Isaacs and Henry Francis Finn painted a vivid, often sensational picture of him as both a ruthless tyrant and a magnetic ruler. These stories, retold in Europe, gave rise to the enduring image of Shaka as the Black Napoleon. However, many of these accounts were written to serve colonial agendas, emphasizing Shaka's savagery to justify European intervention while simultaneously admiring his discipline and statecraft. As a result, much of Shaka's memory is filtered through outsiders' eyes, making it difficult to separate myth from reality. Among the Zulu themselves, Shaka occupies a dual role, both revered and feared. Oral traditions celebrate him as the founder of the nation, the king who gave the Zulu their strength and identity. Songs and stories recount his victories, his discipline, and his unmatched leadership. Yet these same traditions also speak of his cruelty, his harsh punishments, and the suffering endured during his reign. This duality reflects the lived experience of his people. He was both the father of the nation and a source of fear. In modern South Africa, Shaka's legacy has been reinterpreted in light of nationalism, colonial history, and cultural pride. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial writers often depicted him as a brutal despot, using his reputation to portray African kingdoms as inherently unstable. In contrast, later African nationalists reclaimed Shaka as a symbol of resistance and state-building, emphasizing his genius and downplaying the excesses of his rule. Today, Shaka is honored as a cultural hero. Statues of him stand in KwaZulu-Natal, and Shaka Day, September 24th, now celebrated as Heritage Day in South Africa, commemorates his memory. Popular culture, from television dramas like Shaka Zulu, 1986, to countless novels and songs, continues to shape his image, often blending history with legend. In the broader sweep of world history, Shaka stands alongside figures like Genghis Khan, Napoleon, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, leaders who reshaped societies through a combination of military brilliance and ruthless ambition. His kingdom may not have lasted centuries, but his influence on the political map of Africa, the cultural identity of the Zulu, and the imagination of the world is undeniable. He represents both the potential and the peril of charismatic leadership, capable of uniting people, transforming institutions, and inspiring loyalty, but also of inflicting suffering and destruction on an immense scale. Shaka Zulu remains one of history's most compelling figures, a man born under the shadow of illegitimacy, who rose through hardship and exile to become the architect of one of Africa's greatest kingdoms. His life defies simple categorization. He was both the unifier and the destroyer, the father of the Zulu nation and the author of immense suffering. In the span of little more than a decade, he reshaped the political, military, and cultural map of southern Africa. Part of Shaka's enduring fascination lies in the duality of his legacy. To some, he is the Black Napoleon, a military genius whose innovations placed him among the greatest strategists of all time. To others, he is remembered as a ruthless tyrant, whose paranoia and cruelty claimed the lives of thousands, including his own warriors and subjects. Both images contain truth, for Shaka embodied both extremes of power, the ability to inspire and the capacity to terrify. The effects of his reign were profound. His military revolution, the iklwa, the bullhorns formation, the permanent regimental system, not only forged the Zulu kingdom, but also rippled outward, influencing the rise of new states across the subcontinent. His wars and the resulting Mfecane scattered populations gave birth to kingdoms like the Ndebele under Mzilikazi and the Sotho under Moshoshu, and reshaped demographics for generations. At the same time, Shaka established institutions that outlived him: centralized authority, regimental discipline, and a powerful sense of Zulu identity. These would carry forward under later rulers, enabling the Zulu kingdom to withstand both internal challenges and, eventually, the colonial onslaught of the 19th century. Shaka's image has shifted with the times. To colonial chroniclers, he was a savage despot used to justify imperial conquest. To African nationalists, he became a symbol of resistance and pride, proof that African leaders could build powerful, centralized states long before European domination. Today, he is remembered as both a cultural hero and a cautionary tale. His statues standing tall in KwaZulu-Natal, even as his story is told, with acknowledgement of both triumph and tragedy. More than 2 centuries after his birth, Shaka remains alive in oral traditions, in scholarship and in popular imagination. His story is retold in classrooms, novels and films, each generation reshaping him to reflect its own concerns. In the end, Shaka's legacy is the story of power, how it is won, wielded and lost. He demonstrated the transformative potential of leadership, how one man armed with vision, discipline and ruthlessness could take a fragmented society and forge it into a nation. Yet he also revealed the dangers of unchecked authority, how paranoia, cruelty and grief could undermine even the mightiest of rulers. The Zulu kingdom he built endured beyond him, facing the storm of colonial expansion and leaving a mark on African and world history. But the man himself remains both celebrated and feared, a towering figure whose shadow stretches far beyond his short life. In the story of Shaka Zulu, we find the paradox of history itself, the blending of greatness and cruelty, innovation and destruction, unity and division. He was not merely a king of the Zulu, he was a maker of nations, a shaper of peoples, and a figure whose legacy still pulses in the memory of Africa and the world.